Hi, everybody. Welcome back to week 2 of the things that I wish I knew when I first started my spiritual journey, or the things that I think should be spoken about based on some of the stuff that I have experienced that I think could be relevant for anybody else starting out, just because it's quite fascinating. So, this week I'm going to speak through contracts. And as always, I'm not talking about judging whether it's good or bad to enter into contracts with things in the metaphysical realm, rather simply sharing my perspectives, my insight, and my personal experience. Because I do truly believe that there is no right or wrong, because each soul is on its own unique journey. And because of that, I'm not here to judge, just present information based on my own experiences, and think that each person or each soul can therefore make the decision that is right for them. So I'm not fear mongering, I'm not advocating for or against, simply sharing my own experiences and trusting that everybody has free will and can make up their own minds as to whether or not it is something that they want to do or not to do. And just for me personally, I have not and will not enter into contracts with anything in the metaphysical realm. Oh, hi, buddy. Simply because it doesn't resonate or align to myself and what I want to experience on my journey. So, getting into some of my experience, my first encounters were all theoretical, in the form of other teachers, either through some of the training sessions that I attended or books that I read explaining this idea of contracts. And by contracts, I mean whereby us as humans can enter into a contract with something in the metaphysical realm for a value exchange. And of course, that contract will be unique to each individual and each metaphysical being. But say, for example, somebody could enter into a contract with a guide, and in return, that guide may provide more insights, more psychic powers, other things that they promise the human in exchange for, say, use of their vessel, use of their image, whatever it may be. And so I always had this high level understanding over what it was. But again, it wasn't until I started practicing and really diving into my spirituality did I have first-hand experiences with the various ways that these contracts could become initiated by things on the other side. And I will preface it by saying that none of this was me seeking to enter into a contract, rather other things, I guess, seeking to form a contract with myself. And I do believe that when you're early on, particularly if you're just starting out practicing, I think you are in a more vulnerable position, because you may still be learning and early enough on in your journey that you don't really understand what you stand for. And so, of course, if you start out and you're seeking psychic powers, you're seeking to see things in the unseen realm, you're seeking to differentiate yourself from other people, I think you then become more vulnerable to attracting in metaphysical beings or energies that then promise you these things in exchange for something else. So just talking about some of my experiences, I think I touched on some of them in the first video, but I will go through them again because I think it is quite relevant and I can touch on what each taught me. So the first one was in the form of a dream. I think I've mentioned previously that my inner vision is quite strong, and so I receive a lot of my insights, downloads, communications, interactions with that realm through my dream space and my meditation space. So I'm more open and vulnerable in that realm. And the first time it happened was just after I started learning this modality called crystal dreaming. And what happened in the dream was I was just there. It was a normal dream. I was just simply an observer. And I will preface it by saying I don't lucid dream. I don't astral project. And so most of my dreams, like I can remember them. Some of them I participate in, but it's not all the time. Usually my consciousness just switches on if there is a need for me to become aware of something. So in this dream, I was essentially at a store and I met this man, and everything seemed fine at first. I was still in my dream state. Everything seemed fine. Everything seemed normal. And then he basically said, follow me. So again, my dream self, nothing out of the ordinary right now. So I started following him. But then as I was following him, I think something started to click, that the energy there was something abnormal about his energy. And my consciousness or my awareness within the dream space suddenly came online, almost like this is abnormal. This is not our normal dream realm. This is abnormal to us. Pay attention. So I was following him, and then I realized he was leading me somewhere underground. And by now I was fully aware, still in the dream, but just fully aware. And he sat me down at the bar, and he basically said to me outright, very, very abrasively or very abruptly, I think we will be really great working together. And I said, no. What do you mean? Like, no. And he said, we can be so powerful. I can give you so much power. We can be really good together. And I said, no. And again, he kept pushing, and he kept pushing this idea of, if you work with me, I will give you power. We will be great. We can be powerful. Just sign this contract and I can give you this. And I said, no, 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 again and again and again. But he wouldn't leave, and it became increasingly more, what's the right word? Increasingly more, I've lost the word. The dream became more hostile in terms of energy because he was not accepting my no. And so it got to the point where I had to call on Archangel Michael and other protective energies to clear the dream. And as soon as I called on Archangel Michael, I woke immediately. And for me, that showed me the importance of being aware in the dream space, but also knowing what I stood for. Because had I gone into that situation with any sort of wavering about whether or not I did actually want to enter into contracts with something else, like that situation could have gone very differently. And the fact is, you have no idea at the time the cost or the implication of saying yes to something, because there is always a trade-off, right? It's not just a case of work with me, I will give you power. But what do you get back? What is that? Like, you don't know that at the time. And so if you don't know what you stand for, you can be caught off guard in a very vulnerable state and end up in a situation that may be less than ideal for yourself because you haven't fully understood it at the time. And again, that's not trying to fearmonger. It's just saying, be aware of what you stand for, be aware of how to protect yourself in your vulnerable moments, because I would have never have thought that something would have come into my dream realm to try to get me to make a contract with it when I was arguably in a vulnerable state, being unconscious. Like, for me, I'm just lucky that my inner vision is generally quite strong, meaning that my awareness came online and I had enough context beforehand to understand and recognize what was happening, so that even if I was partially online, partially offline, I already knew, no, I do not want to engage in any contracts with anything outside of myself. So therefore, no matter what, the answer is no. There is no temptation. There is nothing for them to feed off. The answer is simply no. So that was one example from the dream realm. And then the second one came later in my journey during meditation. And so again, a state where I was open, not so much vulnerable, but still open, relaxing, not trying to attract anything in. And it was just after I'd done a lot of inner work, so a bit later on in my journey. And this time, something again came to me, but in a different way. And so I was just lying there in meditation, and I noticed my thoughts suddenly shifted to this particular archetype, which I will not name, but this particular archetype. And because I generally try to be more conscious or observant of the energy behind my thoughts, I immediately knew that that thought was not originating from myself. And so it initially pinged my awareness with, oh, what's this? And then it happened again. But this time the same thought of that same archetype had a pull to it, almost like it was pulling my energy, pulling my awareness, pulling my attention towards it. And then came the vision, basically where this archetype in a different form came down and suggested that we would be really good if we worked together. And this time the contract wasn't in the form of work with me, sign this contract, I'll give you power, we'll be really great together. It's simply you resonate with me, I resonate with you. Why don't we kind of just like walk together? Why don't we walk together and see what happens? Why don't you come and join me, explore what I'm all about, and we can see what happens. But again, because I knew what I stood for, I knew that for me on my journey, again, I'm not saying this applies to everybody, just for myself, for me on my journey, I know that the only thing that I want to follow is myself, my own inner light, my own soul, what I believe and know to be true for myself. I don't want any external influence on my journey outside of myself. And so I already knew that while I felt the pull, while I could acknowledge the similarity in resonance and frequency, that's just simply a path that I didn't want to go down. And so again, there was no hostility, there was no resistance, which in the metaphysical realm can sometimes escalate situations. It was just simply like, thank you, I see you, you are, I guess metaphorically, like a sun in your own right, but so am I. I'm not looking to orbit anything else because I'm not a star, I'm not a planet, I'm not looking to orbit something else. I am my own sun, I orbit myself, and I'm not looking to walk with anything outside of myself. And then the energy naturally dissipated. But again, that opened my eyes to the different ways that these contracts can occur. Because again, if I hadn't recognized what was going on, if I had shown any interest in like, oh yeah, let me just explore, let me just see what this is about, then all of a sudden my energy, even though it's not a formal, you give me this, I give you that, my energy is still therefore being drawn away from me to orbit something else. And I don't know what that exchange would do to myself, how I live life, how I see life, or my spiritual journey. And so I guess that's just another example over how those contracts can be formed, but in a less explicit way. Because I guess when you follow a particular archetype, for good or for bad, your energy moves away from your core to orbit something else. And therefore that gives almost implicit permission, if you will, for that archetypical energy to exchange with your own, and it becomes a contract in its own right over you follow what I stand for, even just energetically, and therefore you get certain things that come with that. And then finally, one final example that's not from my own direct experience, but from teachers, because I think it's important to be aware of as well, are when you engage with different practitioners, considering who they may potentially be contracted with and to. Because by receiving their services, you then become part of that that energy or whoever they're working with as well. And so, for example, one of my teachers told me a story over when she went to see a psychic in a bookstore, apparently, and she saw this psychic was working with this energy, and every person who went to see this psychic, the energy that was working with the psychic would therefore siphon some of the energy of her clients. And so, in that example, the contractual exchange, I'm guessing, could have been something like, work with me, I will give you whatever you need to be a well renowned psychic or to work in that field. And in return, I consume or I take some of the energy or something from the people who come to see you. And so, therefore, it becomes an exchange where you, as the client, are unknowingly participating in something that you never agreed to enter into, but in the same way you did because you're agreeing to receive the services from that particular psychic. And so for me, that therefore showed the importance over just being conscious over how you protect your energy and yourself when you see practitioners, because you never know who they are working with, or you never know their energy or their intentions for what they do. And even if they might be pure, and even though you might receive what you sought out to receive from them, there may be a hidden cost involved. And so it's just understanding how you can protect yourself, not only from being subjected to entering into something that you might not be fully aware of, but also protecting yourself when you see people who may be working with things that you also are not aware of. And so I guess throughout all of these examples, what I'm trying to show you is the different ways in which these contracts can arise, so that you can understand, at least from my experiences, how they might do so for yourself as well, so that you can be sovereign enough in yourself to know what you want to do if those. And probably one other thing worth mentioning is the hidden costs, because at the time it can sound great, right? And probably quite innocent in the sense of, if something comes to you and says, I'll give you clairvoyance if you just let me work through you. Like, you might think, okay, that sounds great. Like, I really want clairvoyance. Like, I'll be able to trust myself. Like, I think I'll be able to handle it. It'll all be fine. But yet you might not understand the hidden costs associated with that, right? And it can become very tricky to exit out of something that you have entered into because of just how the energy works. And so, using an example with succubus, incubus type of arrangements, which I guess are contractual in themselves, right? With the succubus or incubus going to the host and saying, I'll give you pleasure, and in return, I get your energy. And that's not, they don't explicitly say that, right? Like, they don't say, I'll give you pleasure, let me feast off your energy. They just say, I'll give you pleasure. And if the host opens, then that is the agreement that then lets them consume their energy. But the problem is that once they are open to that, their bodies and the energetic pathways within their bodies become used to that particular experience. And so, even if, say, a few days down the line, the host, not the host, but the dreamer, but for argument's sake, I'll call them a host, the host starts to see what's going on and all of a sudden goes, oh crap, I don't want to be in this anymore. It's not always as easy as they may think to exit out of that agreement, not because intellectually they don't want to be there anymore, but because energetically they are used to receiving the pleasure from the succubus or the incubus, which means that when that being or that entity or energy approaches the host, even if intellectually they might say, I don't want this anymore, all the succubus or incubus has to do is probe slightly. And because the body remembers, even a 0.01% opening is energetic permission. And so all of a sudden, what started as an innocent, okay, sure, I'll receive pleasure, can turn into something that can become very difficult to exit out of, because it's not intellectually, I don't want this anymore, like let's just cut it and run, even though that's the story that is told a lot in the spiritual community. It's not as simple as I just cut this cord, I exit out of this agreement, like no more, because when that being comes back, they're going to probe, and if they find a 0.01% energetic opening, not intellectual, but energetic opening, that's still that permission to go again. And so it's just being aware of the consequences over what you might be getting yourself into, because it's not always as easy as what it's made out to be in the spiritual community to exit out of these things. And again, that's coming from my own personal experience. And that's not to say that that's not to say that you're stuck forever. It just means that in order to get out of that agreement, you need to change how your energy responds to the contract itself, because it is not mental. It's not just a case of I cut the cord, I exit out of this, be gone. Because when the thing comes back, if your energy still says, okay, yeah, like maybe I still want this like a little bit, or even if they just find that 1% opening, because you've already made the contract beforehand, they still have permission to go right in, because it's your energy, not your intellect, that governs permission, agreements, etc. And so it's just being aware again over the consequences and the hidden costs over anything that you enter into, because once you receive something, whether it be psychic powers, different abilities like fame, fortune, pleasure, your energy body gets used to that. And the more you receive, the harder it is to then change how your energy body responds. That's not to say it's not impossible. It just means you need to exit out of it at the energetic level, not just the intellect level. And so it's just being mindful of that as well. Great. So as usual, I rambled for quite a bit, but hopefully that was helpful. If I can sum up a few things to take from the video, it would be, firstly, just know within yourself over whether or not you want to receive anything from anything outside of yourself, so that if you are presented with situations where certain beings in the metaphysical realm come to you, you already know your position, because that could happen when you're in a open and vulnerable state, and you don't want to be second guessing yourself in those moments. And when you make that decision, just be aware of the consequences, both in terms of what it might be taking from you, and also in terms of the difficulty in exiting out of anything that you might enter into. And so just make sure that you have the holistic view over contracts with metaphysical beings, and so that you can know your stance, so that you know how to respond if you are presented with any situation akin to what I have just spoken about.